Josephine Jo Winters had been working maintenance at Ganymede Research Station for 3 years. And in all that time, the most exciting thing that had happened was when the hydroponics lab accidentally grew psychedelic tomatoes. So when her scanner picked up an anomalous energy signature in sublevel G, Section 17, her first thought wasn't alien technology or an interdimensional portal. Her first thought was, great, another malfunctioning thermal regulator. The bowels of Ganymede Station were a maze of utility corridors, science labs, and storage rooms that had been carved into Jupiter's largest moon over decades of expansion. Jo's breath fogged in front of her face as she made her way through the dimly lit passageways. This deep, they kept temperatures just above freezing to conserve power. "Maintenance Chief Winters, please confirm your location," crackled her cum. Unit Jo tapped the device on her wrist. Sublevel G, heading to Section 17. Following up on that energy spike. Control. Acknowledged. Dr. Powell has been notified of your approach. Jo frowned. Terrence Powell wasn't scheduled to be working today, much less in a rarely used storage section. The tall, thin physicist usually kept to the quantum computing labs on the upper levels, where the artificial gravity was stronger and the coffee machines were better maintained. The corridor ended at a junction, and Jo turned left, following her scanner's guidance. The energy signature was growing stronger, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. She rounded the corner and stopped dead in her tracks. Dr. Powell stood in front of what appeared to be a massive, circular hatch embedded in the wall. Hatch that definitely wasn't on any station schematics Jo had ever seen. It was nearly 3 meters in diameter, made of a material that gleamed with an iridescent sheen under the emergency lights. Strange symbols were etched around its circumference, curving and flowing like no writing system Jo recognized. "Dr. Powell?" Jo called out, her voice echoing in the confined space. The physicist spun around, his face pale and drawn. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his normally immaculate lab coat was wrinkled and stained. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Winters, you shouldn't be here." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Jo gestured at her tablet. "Energy spike in this section. Just doing my job." "What exactly am I looking at here, Doctor? Because I'm pretty sure this door isn't standard issue Europa Science Directorate equipment." Powell's eyes darted nervously between Jo and the hatch. "It's classified. Level 10 clearance only." "Well, that's convenient," Jo said, stepping closer to examine the strange door. "Considering there is no level 10 clearance on this station?" As she approached, Jo felt a strange vibration in her chest, like standing too close to a massive subwoofer. The air seemed to thicken, making each breath slightly more difficult than it should have been. The symbols on the hatch began to glow with a soft blue light. "Don't get any closer." Powell lunged forward, grabbing Jo's arm with surprising strength. "It reacts to proximity, to intention." Jo pulled away from his grip. "What reacts? What the hell is going on here, Powell?" This section was supposed to be empty storage. Powell ran a shaking hand through his disheveled hair. "It was empty 3 weeks ago. Then we picked up the signal from the Europa subsurface ocean. Something down there has been trying to communicate for, well, we don't know how. Long, decades, maybe centuries." Jo looked back at the hatch. "And this is what answered?" Powell's laugh was hollow, edged with hysteria. "No, Winters. This is what came through when we answered." A tremor ran through the station, subtle but unmistakable. The lights flickered. Jo's scanner began displaying readings that made no scientific sense: negative energy outputs, inverse radiation patterns, temporal anomalies. "I need to report this. This is way beyond a maintenance issue." "No." Powell stepped between Jo and the corridor. "No reports, no communications. Director Nakamura already knows. This is contained." Jo felt her temper rising. Contained. "There's a giant alien door in our station that's pumping out enough weird energy to fry my equipment, and you call that contained?" Powell grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wild with fear and something else, a desperate, pleading intensity that made Jo's protest die in her throat. "Listen to me very carefully, Josephine Winters," he whispered, his face inches from hers. What's behind that door isn't meant to be here. It isn't meant to be anywhere near our reality. But the mathematics alone would drive most people insane. Turned, staring at the sealed hatch with a mixture of dread and fascination. "Promise me you won't open it," Powell said, his voice barely audible. "No matter what it offers you. No matter what it says. No matter what happens to the station, to me, to anyone. Promise me." Joe looked from Powell to the mysterious hatch and back again. "What exactly is behind there, Doctor?" Powell's expression crumpled into something between a smile and a grimace. "The future," he whispered, "or the end of everything." 2 days after discovering the hatch, Joe couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She'd tried to focus on her regular maintenance duties, but her mind kept returning to Powell's warning and those strange symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Winters, got a minute?" Joe looked up to see Wesley O'Caffer, the station's communications specialist, hovering in her workshop doorway. Tall and lanky, with close-cropped hair, Wesley was normally the most easygoing person on the station. Today, his usual smile was nowhere to be seen. "What's up, Wes?" Joe set down her tools. Wesley glanced over his shoulder before entering and closing the door behind him. "I've been picking up something weird on our deep space array. Started about 3 weeks ago." Joe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature controls. 3 weeks. Right when Powell said they detected that signal from Europa's ocean, Wesley's eyebrows shot up. "How do you know about that? That project's supposed to be classified?" "Let's just say I stumbled onto something related." Joe hesitated, then decided Wesley deserved to know. "Oh, Hotch Wes. A massive alien-looking hatch in sublevel G that definitely wasn't there during my inspection last month." Wesley sank into the chair opposite Joe's workbench. "That ... actually makes sense. The signals I've been receiving, they're not random noise. There's a pattern, but it doesn't match any known language or code. And here's the really strange part. They're not coming from outside the station. They're coming from inside," Joe finished. "From sublevel GI to be precise." Wesley pulled out his tablet and showed Joe a schematic of the station with a pulsing red dot marking the hatch's location. "Whatever's down there is broadcasting, and not just locally. Signal is being amplified and directed outward, toward the Kuiper Belt." Station's intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Security Officer Rodriguez requests all department heads report to Conference Room A immediately. This is not a drill." Joe and Wesley exchanged worried glances before rushing to the meeting. When they arrived, the room was already filled with tense voices. Camila Rodriguez, the station's head of security, stood at the front, her compact frame rigid with tension. "Equipment has gone missing from multiple departments," Rodriguez announced, once everyone was seated. "Lab supplies, communications components, even parts from the quantum computing lab." Director Hiroshi Nakamura, a stern man with salt and pepper hair who rarely left his office, interrupted. "Officer Rodriguez, surely this is an inventory error. With respect." "Director, this is deliberate theft," Rodriguez countered. "Security footage has been tampered with. Access logs have been altered. And there's more." She pulled up an image on the main display. "This was taken by a maintenance drone in Utility Corridor E7 last night." The image showed a shadowy figure, carrying what looked like scientific equipment. The figure was humanoid, but moved with an unnatural fluidity, and its proportions seemed subtly wrong. "That's not one of our crew," someone whispered. "No," Rodriguez agreed grimly. "We've accounted for all personnel. Whatever this is, it's not human." Murmurs of disbelief filled the room. Joe caught Wesley's eye across the table, and he gave a slight nod. They needed to tell everyone about the hatch. Before Joe could speak, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency systems kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. "Status report," Nakamura demanded. The chief engineer, Fatima Reyes, was already at a terminal. "Main power grid is failing. Backup systems are engaged, but operating at 60% capacity. Something's draining our energy reserves." Joe stood up. "Director, there's something you need to know about sublevel GI Section 17. Nakamura's eyes narrowed. "That's a restricted area, Winters." How do you— Because I was called there for maintenance, Joe interrupted. There's a hatch down there, sir? A hatch that Dr. Powell seems terrified of. And I think whatever's behind it is responsible for everything that's happening. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Director Nakamura. His expression remained neutral, but Joe could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. Dr. Powell has been conducting authorized research, he said carefully. The situation is under control. Then where is Powell now? Joe challenged. No one's seen him since yesterday. As if on cue, Joe's comm unit buzzed with an incoming message. The display showed Powell's ID, but the message itself sent ice through her veins. It's awake. Find my research. Don't trust Nakamura. Powell's research lab was in chaos when Joe and Wesley arrived. Papers were scattered across the floor. Holographic displays flickered with corrupted data, and there was a dark stain on the wall that Joe desperately hoped wasn't blood. Someone— Left in a hurry, Wesley muttered as they began searching. Joe moved to Powell's main workstation and found it locked down with encryption she had no hope of breaking. But taped underneath the desk was an old-fashioned USB drive, the kind that had become obsolete decades ago. Classic Powell paranoia, using tech so outdated that modern systems might not even recognize it. Found something, Joe called to Wesley, who was rifling through a filing cabinet. Back in Joe's workshop, they cobbled together an adapter to read the drive. What they found turned their world upside down. Powell's files contained years of research into what he called phase-shifted entities, beings that existed partially in our dimension and partially in others. According to his notes, the Europa Ocean had been home to a dormant entity for millennia, possibly predating humanity's evolution. The Sentinel Project, Joe read aloud. Established after first contact with the entity in 2001-57. Initial communication promising entity offered knowledge, its technological advancement. She scrolled further. Warning signs ignored. Entity began influencing research team. Episodes, obsessive behavior. Wesley leaned closer to the screen. Look at this. Containment protocol initiated. Entity sealed behind dimensional barrier. Research station established as monitoring outpost. That's us, Joe realized. Ganymede station wasn't built for Jupiter research. It was built to monitor what's trapped under Europa's ice. The next file was a video of Powell, clearly recorded recently. He looked even worse than when Joe had seen him, gaunt, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. If you're watching this, the entity has likely broken through its initial containment. Powell's recording began. He called it Nemesis. It communicates telepathically, offering whatever you desire most. Knowledge, power, lost loved ones, return to you, it's all lies. What it really wants is a physical form and access to our dimension. Powell's image leaned closer to the camera. Director Nakamura believes he can control it. Use it as a weapon against the Martian colonies. He's wrong. Nemesis doesn't serve. It consumes. The hatch is the last barrier, designed with technology we barely understand, borrowed from another species that encountered Nemesis millennia ago. The recording ended with Powell's haunted eyes staring directly into the camera. If the hatch opens, Earth is finished. An explosion rocked the station, sending tools clattering to the floor. Joe's comm unit erupted with panicked voices reporting system failures throughout the station. We need to get to that hatch, Joe said, grabbing her toolkit. Whatever's happening. That's ground zero. They raced through corridors filled with frightened crew members. The station's artificial gravity was fluctuating, causing momentary weightlessness followed by crushing pressure. Lights sputtered and died as they descended to sublevel G. When they reached Section 17, they found they weren't alone. Director Nakamura stood before the hatch, which now pulsed with intense blue light. The symbols around its edge rotated slowly, like a combination lock being turned. With him were 3 security officers and Dr. Olivia Mercer, the station's xenobiologist. Director Joe called out, "You need to evacuate the station. Powell's research shows that we've discovered the greatest advancement in human history." Nakamura finished, turning to face them. His eyes had an unnatural gleam, and his voice resonated oddly. Imagine it, Winters. Technology centuries beyond our own, cures for every disease. energy sources that would make our current methods look like burning sticks for warmth. Dr. Mercer stepped forward, her expression eerily serene. It's beautiful, Joe. It showed me the universe as it truly is.
Oh.
All we have to do is let it in. Joe realized with horror that they were all already under Nemesis's influence. The security officer's eyes had the same glazed look, and they moved. With the same unnatural precision as the figure in Rodriguez's security footage. "Where's Powell?" Joe demanded. "Dr. Powell had a crisis of faith," Nakamura said dismissively. "He's been ... relieved of duty." The hatch's light intensified, bathing them all in cold blue radiance. The symbols stopped rotating, and with a sound, like 1,000 voices sighing in unison, the massive door began to open. The hatch swung open with impossible silence, revealing not a room or corridor beyond, but a shifting, swirling vortex of light and darkness. Colors that had no names in human language pulsed and flowed like liquid. Joe felt her mind struggling. To process what her eyes were seeing, it was as if reality itself bent and warped around the opening. From within this maelstrom of impossible physics stepped a figure. At first glance it appeared human, a tall woman with features so symmetrical. Imperfect, they almost seemed artificial. But as Joe looked closer, she realized that the woman's outline seemed to blur, like a photograph slightly out of focus. Her movements were too fluid, too precise, and her eyes were filled with stars. "I am Valorian," the entity said, its voice somehow inside Joe's head, rather than reaching her ears. "Last observer of the progenitor collective. I have waited long for this moment." Director Nakamura fell to his knees, his face rapturous. "You honor us with your presence. Great." 1. Joe felt Wesley tensing beside her, reaching slowly for the emergency beacon on his belt. She placed a hand on his arm, warning him to wait. Antagonizing this being seemed unwise. "You are not what I expected," Valorian said, its gaze fixing on Joe. "You resist. Interesting." Joe's mind filled suddenly with images her childhood home, her father who had died during the Mars colony uprising, a career in deep space exploration she had abandoned to take this safe maintenance job. Each memory was perfect, more vivid than her own recollections, but subtly wrong-enhanced and idealized. "I can give you everything," Valorian promised, moving closer. "Knowledge, purpose, the truth about your universe, and the 1,000 others that exist alongside it." "Why would you do that?" Joe asked, fighting to keep her thoughts clear. "Because I am hunted," Valorian replied simply. "The Draxian Collective seeks to eradicate my kind. We were once like you, curious, exploratory. Then we evolved beyond physical form. The Draxians fear what they cannot understand, and you need our help." Wesley asked, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "I need sanctuary," Valorian corrected. "In exchange, I will elevate humanity. Your technology will advance centuries within decades. Your lifespans will extend. Your understanding of reality will expand beyond imagination." Dr. Mercer stepped forward eagerly. "We've already begun preparations. The communications array is being reconfigured to send a signal," Joe finished, the pieces finally clicking together. "Not to call for help. To tell your kind where to find us." Valorian's perfect face showed no emotion, but the air around it seemed to darken. "My people need refuge. Your solar system has resources, space. We would be ... grateful guests." "And the Draxians," Joe pressed. "If they're hunting you, won't they follow?" "A small price to pay for transcendence," Nakamura interjected. "With Valorian's knowledge, we could defend ourselves against any threat." Joe remembered Powell's warning, his absolute terror at what lay behind the hatch. She looked at the entranced crew members, at the unnatural perfection of Valorian, at the writhing dimensional tear that defied physics. "This isn't right," she whispered to Wesley. "Whatever it's offering, there's a catch." As if hearing her thoughts, Valorian turned those star-filled eyes toward Joe again. "You doubt me, Josephine Winters. Let me show you the truth." Before Joe could react, Valorian's hand suddenly elongated and too thin to be human touched her forehead. Reality fractured around her. Joe saw visions of Earth transformed, gleaming cities that reached the clouds. Humans with enhanced bodies and minds, spacecraft capable of reaching nearby stars. But beneath this shining surface, she glimpsed something else. Humanity changed. Their individuality slowly eroded, becoming mere vessels for consciousness that was not their own. She saw the Draxians too not monsters, but a species of methodical, cautious beings who had learned through bitter experience what happened when Valorian's kind were welcomed into a civilization. She saw worlds drained of life, serving as mere fuel for entities that had long ago abandoned any concept of morality. With a gasp, Joe tore herself away from Valorian's touch. "You're not refugees," she accused, backing away. "You're parasites." Valorian's perfect facade slipped for just an instant, revealing something ancient and hungry beneath. "We are evolution," it corrected. "As you are to the single-celled organisms from which you evolved, so we are to you. It is the natural order." The station shuddered violently and alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Wesley's comm unit crackled with emergency broadcasts. "Unidentified. Vessels approaching Europa," came Rodriguez's voice, strained but professional. "They're not responding to hails, and they're not using any recognized propulsion system." "The Draxians have found us," Valorian said, its voice now edged with something. "Like fear, you must complete the signal. Summon my kind. It is your only hope of survival now." Director Nakamura and the others moved with robotic precision toward the communications controls embedded in the wall near the hatch. Joe looked desperately around for something, anything to stop this. Her eyes fell on Powell's body, crumpled in. The corner of the room half hidden in shadow. In his outstretched hand was a device she recognized, the emergency destabilizer. Used for preventing catastrophic pressure buildup in the station's core. With a surge of desperate clarity, Joe knew what she had to do. Joe lunged for Powell's device as the station shuddered again. Her fingers closed around the destabilizer, just as Valorian noticed her movement. "Stop her," the entity commanded, its perfect face contorting with inhuman rage. The security officers turned toward Joe with mechanical precision, but Wesley was faster, tackled the nearest guard, sending them both crashing into the second officer. Dr. Mercer grabbed at Joe's arm. Her normally kind face twisted into a snarl. "You'll doom us. All," Mercer hissed, her grip unnaturally strong. Joe wrenched free and backed toward the dimensional tear that still pulsed behind Valorian. "This thing isn't offering salvation," she shouted to the others. "It's offering extinction. I saw what happens to the civilizations that welcome them." "You saw what it wanted you to see," Nakamura countered, his voice resonating with Valorian's. "Otherworldly tone. Your primitive mind cannot comprehend the gift being offered." The station's emergency system blared an automated warning. "Alert. Unknown vessels have breached Europa's atmosphere. Intercept course detected." "The Draxians come," Valorian said, its form beginning to shift and blur at the edges. "You have no choice now but to accept my aid." Joe raised the destabilizer. "Actually, I do have a choice." Understanding dawned. In those star-filled eyes, "You wouldn't," Valorian said, taking a step back toward its dimensional gateway. "You would destroy this station yourself, all your people for what? Species you've never met. A warning from a dead man?" "For humanity," Joe answered simply. "Whatever we might become on our own terms." She activated the destabilizer and hurled it directly into the pulsing tear in reality. The device disappeared into the swirling vortex, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the tear began to convulse, its edges fluctuating wildly. The colors within it shifted to deep crimson and black. A high-pitched wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere filled the chamber. "What have you done?" Valorian shrieked, its human form disintegrating to reveal something vast and incomprehensible beneath a writhing mass of light and darkness, with too many dimensions. "Destabilize your gateway," Joe answered, backing away as the tear began to collapse in on itself. Powell's note said, "Your kind exists partially in our dimension and partially in others. I'm guessing that means you need a stable connection between the two." The security officers and Dr. Mercer collapsed to the ground, suddenly free of Valorian's influence. Director Nakamura clutched his head, screaming in agony as the entity's control was torn from his mind. Valorian thrashed in what appeared to be pain or panic, its form stretching and contracting impossibly. "You cannot comprehend what you're rejecting," it howled, the sound vibrating in Joe's bones. "The knowledge the power comes with, too." "High a price," Joe finished. The tear contracted further, pulling Valorian back toward it. The entity fought against the pull, reaching out with appendages that hurt Joe's eyes to look at directly. "This is not over," Valorian promised, its voice fading. "We have tasted your world now. We will find another way." The sound like reality. Its self-tearing, the dimensional gateway collapsed completely, taking Valorian with it. The massive hatch swung shut with a final, definitive boom, its symbols fading to dull, lifeless etchings. In the silence that followed, Joe helped Wesley to his feet. Round them, the station staff were regaining consciousness, confused and disoriented, but alive. The Draxian ships, Wesley remembered suddenly, checking his cum unit. They retreating, pulling back from Europa. "They got what they came for," Joe said, looking at the now dormant hatch. "They were never here to attack us. They were hunting Valorian." Director Nakamura sat slumped against the wall, his face ashen. "I let it in," he whispered. "It showed me visions of Earth's ascendant, humanity spreading throughout the galaxy. I believed." "We all want to believe in shortcuts," Joe said, not unkindly. "But some knowledge has to be earned." 3 days later, as the station was being evacuated, a transmission reached them from Earth. The sleek military vessel Hyperion had arrived in orbit around Ganymede, and its captain, Elijah Blackwood, requested an immediate meeting with the station's senior staff. In Nakamura's office, Captain Blackwood, a stern-faced man with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone used to command, reviewed Powell's data and Joe's account of what had happened. "The official record will show that Ganymede Station experienced a catastrophic system failure," Blackwood announced when she had finished. "All research data has been classified at the highest level." "You're covering it up," Joe said flatly. Blackwood's expression remained neutral. "Consider the alternatives, Chief Winters. Mass panic? Religious upheaval? The knowledge that we're not alone in the universe is destabilizing enough. The knowledge that there are entities out there that view us as we might view ants would be devastating." "People deserve the truth," Wesley argued. "People deserve safety," Blackwood countered, "and preparation, which is why I'm here to offer both of you positions with the newly formed Stellar Defense Initiative. We need people who have encountered these entities and remained ... themselves." Joe looked out the viewport at Jupiter's swirling storms. Somewhere out there, beyond the gas giant and its moons, beyond their solar system, Valorian's kind were watching, waiting, and the Draxians were holding the line. "There will be others," she said quietly. "Other entities, other gateways." Blackwood agreed. "And humanity needs to be ready when they come." Joe thought of Powell's warning, of the hatch sealed once more in the depths of Ganymede Station. She thought of Valorian's promise and threat. "We will find another way." "Do we start?" she asked. As the Hyperion pulled away from the evacuated station, carrying the survivors and all evidence of what had transpired, Joe stood at a viewport watching Ganymede recede. The massive moon would continue its silent orbit around Jupiter, guarding its secret, one of many humanity would face as they ventured further into the cosmic dark. Beneath the station, sealed behind steel and alien mathematics, the hatch remained a boundary between worlds, a warning and a promise that some doors, once discovered, can never be truly forgotten. "Promise me you won't open it," Powell said. Joe had kept that promise, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that someday, somewhere, another hatch would be found, and the choice would need to be made again. Next time, humanity would be ready.